Why, hello there, old sports. Now, to start off this video, I'd like to just say that I've been having kind of a rough mental health day. And by day, I mean month. So, I only bring this up to point out that if the editing on this video is a little lighter than usual, I'd like to apologize. Obviously, I'm still going to put effort into making this a good video, I just might not go all out on presentation. I hope you can understand. And anyways, let's talk about the Funny Bear RPG. On August 8th, 2026, as part of the 12th year anniversary celebration for Five Nights at Freddy's, Mega Cat Studios announced FNAF World 2. Now, technically just like with Security Breach 2, which was announced on the same day, we don't technically have concrete confirmation that it is what we think it is. It's kinda just the fact that there's really no other option that would realistically fit this scenario. Because we have been told before this that a sequel was coming, so when you give a cutesy looking set of the Five Nights at Freddy's characters along with a giant number 2, I feel like people can put those pieces together in only a few different ways. And, come on, this is Five Nights at Freddy's, we don't get anything for free anyways, so I highly doubt we would ever get, like, an official title until, like, we actually get a trailer, or maybe some sort of, like, Steam page description thing. I guess my point is that, yeah, technically this isn't confirmed to be FNAF World 2, but let's be honest, it's FNAF World 2. For those who aren't aware, Mega Cat Studios actually does have a past working for Five Nights at Freddy's as a franchise, and they made the Into the Pit game that came out for the 10th year anniversary. So, I do think that this could go well. It's not just like Scott is bringing in some random studio to make FNAF World 2. This is a studio he has worked with before, and this is also a studio that has proved they can make a good game. Now, before anyone brings it up, yes, I am aware that Mega Cat Studios has had some allegations brought against them about some unfair working practices and general mistreatment of employees. However, I don't really want to talk about that too much, because I don't really know how that would affect the game itself too much, and I wouldn't want to take the potential actual abuse of real people and reduce that to drama about Five Nights at Freddy's. I feel like that isn't really fair or reasonable, so I'm just not going to bring that up again. I hope you understand. Anyways, while many people have been very excited for FNAF World 2, alongside the other things announced for the 12th year anniversary, I'm a bit more cautiously optimistic overall, because there's a few things that I feel like people are either, well, I don't want to say willfully forgetting, because I don't think it's malicious or anything. I just think people are getting a little too excited and aren't remembering the past very much. And when we don't remember the past, we are very susceptible to repeating its mistakes. Now, I'm not exactly sure how to word this next part, so I'm going to go off script a bit. FNAF Security Breach had a very rocky launch. One could even say it was a dumpster fire. We all know this. But I'm going to be honest, in the long run, I think Security Breach being as buggy of a mess as it was on launch was almost a blessing. Because, I'm gonna be honest, now that Security Breach has got most of its bugs ironed out, it's not really that fun or enjoyable at all. It's kinda just there, it's kinda just a very stereotypical mascot horror game. Maybe its scale is a bit bigger than its peers, I'll give it that, but it really doesn't have that many redeeming qualities, let's be honest. I know plenty of people who like Security Breach because it was just this funny little plaything they could break under their knee and twist in super weird ways, and pretty much just treat it as a sandbox game almost. They don't like Security Breach for what it was trying to be, they didn't like it for the gameplay or the story, they liked it because it was a mess. So, once all the bugs, or at least a vast majority of them, are gone, what are you left with? What you loved about the game is gone now. All you're left with is mediocre. And honestly, sometimes I feel like this is a good example of being mediocre is worse than being bad. Because at least you can find something fun in the bad. It can be so bad that it's good. But when you're mediocre, that's kinda it. You're just mediocre. I would know. Now, some of you can probably see where I'm going with this, but to tie this back into FNAF World, I don't want to be the one to say this to you guys, but while FNAF World is far from being bad or mediocre, I wouldn't really call it a masterpiece either. I think FNAF World is a very enjoyable game for what it is, but I feel like there's been a lot of revisionism around this game, especially in the last few years, where people are acting like it's a lot better than it actually is. And part of that may be because we have games like Security Breach that shows us what a really bad game can look like. Because if you look at FNAF World and then say, well, at least it isn't as bad as Security Breach, I mean, yeah, you're right. I can't really blame you for feeling like the game is at least decent because it isn't as bad as Security Breach, but I feel like that also shouldn't stop us from asking for better. Okay, now that I splashed the cold water in your face, I feel like I should explain myself a bit better. Out of all of the Five Nights at Freddy's games, World is easily the one I've put the most time into. I will not deny that, and it's probably one of my favorite games. However, I feel like most people's perception of Five Nights at Freddy's World, or FNAF World as I'll continue to call it because Five Nights at Freddy's World feels awkward. Or, where was I going? Oh yeah, the game is not really... I feel like it's hard to get a good opinion on it because its reputation has been so turbulent over time. People started out hating it for what I feel like were the wrong reasons, and then what ended up happening was time went by, new games came out, people had time to look back at the old games, and FNAF World also got a few updates that really improved it. So now I feel like people think it's better than it is compared to thinking it worse than it was. And like I said, I feel like both of those extremes aren't really a good way to look at the game reputation-wise or quality-wise. I feel like we need to try to look at more in the middle instead of landing on one end of an extreme. The FNAF World that people played upon release is a lot different than the one that you can go download right now. And yes, part of that is just a few quality of life updates that were added along the way, as long as a major content update. But I think the attitude around the series has also changed a lot, because before FNAF World came out, the last game that had come out was Five Nights at Freddy's 4, which most people actually or maybe most isn't the correct word, but lots of people that I've seen consider it to be the peak of the sit and survive gameplay in the series. And then even if the story was messy back then, at least compared to what we think of it now, FNAF 4 had a very dark, melancholic, tragic story. So to go from that to a completely different genre with a completely different tone was quite wacky to a lot of people, and how do I say this nicely? Scott Cawthon is really good at making Five Nights at Freddy's games quickly. Five Nights at Freddy's World is barely a FNAF game. You cannot make a very good RPG in less than a few months. Or maybe that isn't correct. I guess my point is that the first 4 Five Nights at Freddy's games that had come out to that point were made relatively quickly when we're looking at game development, and I feel like that worked because those games are very level-based in terms of you only really had to make one level, and then you just repeat that level 4 or 5 more times, introducing a few new elements, but the core gameplay stayed the same. And I feel like I'm explaining this badly, but I feel like once you've made Night 1 of Five Nights at Freddy's, you've already made at least half the game. From there you just need to add in more characters and then change some numbers between levels. So making an RPG with a bunch of new areas, a bunch of new party members, a bunch of new moves, all of that stuff, I feel like even if you can make a good RPG in 5 months like Scott did, or tried to at least, that would be a very hard challenge when the game structure's that different, if you get what I'm trying to get across. Now, the easiest way you can see this kind of lack of polish in the game is by looking at the overworld from the release version compared to the current version, where instead of having an 8-bit minigame look, it has a fully 3D look, even if it's still using 2D sprites. It's using renders of 3D models and stuff. It looks a bit more polished, is I guess what I'm trying to get across here. Adding on to that, in terms of story, FNAF World is very meta, and while that isn't inherently bad on its own, I feel like it kind of furthers that sense of tonal whiplash I'm trying to explain here, because going from those first 4 FNAF games, which took themselves very seriously, and the jokes they did have, I feel like this is something people forget, but FNAF has always had a sense of humor. It's just that I feel like the series tended to focus a bit more on the tragedy, and then it also knew to not be like the MCU and interrupt the tragedy talk with all jokes every 30 seconds. But when you're going to a game like FNAF World where the tone is jokes 24/7, again, tonal whiplash. You're going from a very serious story that has humorous moments to a very humorous story with a few serious moments. Again, it's not what people were expecting, and maybe not what people were wanting at the time. Which, again, I'm trying to convey here because that's how people saw FNAF World at first. It was unpolished, the story was weird compared to what they were looking for, and it just didn't feel like a Five Nights at Freddy's game, at least not what people were expecting from the series at that point. But in the time since FNAF World came out, a lot has changed. We've had a lot more games that take themselves a lot less serious than those first 4 games did. For better or worse. I don't want to go into a whole thing about whether the tonal differences in FNAF are good or bad. I just want to explain that the tone has shifted a bit. We've gotten a lot more spin-off games on top of that. So what people... And I guess that's another thing. People saw FNAF World as Five Nights at Freddy's 5, in a sense. It was the 5th entry in this kind of indie game series. Even if it was a really big indie game series, it wasn't seen as this mega franchise like it is today. There wasn't all these books and 2 movies and all this different stuff. So anything that was going to be different, the first different thing was always going to be met with some pushback, and unfortunately, that was FNAF World's cross to bear. So I guess my point is that I feel like if FNAF World came out today, it would be seen a lot differently, even if it came out in that unpolished state. Because what people were expecting out of Five Nights at Freddy's is a lot different. Hell, people would probably just be happy to see another Scott game, regardless of its quality. My overall point, like I keep saying, is that when FNAF World came out, people were criticizing it, maybe not as a game, but as an idea, almost. They thought this was the direction Five Nights at Freddy's was going in, and they weren't exactly happy about it, which I can understand that, especially because they didn't know if we were going to go back to serious games or sit and survive games, so I can understand why people would be concerned about that. And the thing is, I feel like maybe, in that pursuit of being scared that things were changing, some of the actual problems with the games kind of fell through the cracks, and then as time has gone on, and like I said, people are a lot more open to a game like FNAF World now. People are just happy that it exists, compared to being mad that it exists at all. And again, I feel like some of the actual problems with the game are falling through the cracks. Especially because lots of the people who were playing FNAF World when it came out have grown up, or at least have grown enough to have nostalgia for FNAF World. So again, they're gonna look at it through rose-colored glasses, and again, those flaws that are inherent to the gameplay loop may fall through the cracks. Looking back at people's early criticisms on FNAF World, the biggest point I saw people criticizing the game for was the art style, the cutesy adventure look. And honestly, I don't see why people were that upset about it. But something I feel like people should have been upset about was the shallow gameplay loop. And maybe I've just played too many RPGs, or maybe I've played too many good RPGs, I don't know. But I feel like the gameplay in FNAF World is... I know lots of people say FNAF is kind of an introductory series to horror, but I feel like it also has merits beyond just being an introduction to horror. It also stands alone as a good horror game. I feel like FNAF World is an introduction to RPGs without actually standing very well as an RPG on its own. And I feel like I keep saying, it's because of the gameplay. It's just very shallow. For a while, I had this idea in my head that if I had to describe FNAF World's gameplay in one sentence, it would be, sit back and watch the pretty colors. But then I came to a realization. First of all, the game is really bright, so it's kind of even hard to see the colors sometimes. And to break the fourth wall a bit here, if you notice the gameplay in the background getting a bit darker randomly, I'm darkening it for the battles because that's where the most screen flashing is, and I would rather not give someone epilepsy, so that's really the only way I can think of to make the footage less, nauseating. Getting back on track, however, I unfortunately think that that sentence actually works pretty well, because funnily enough, I feel like lots of RPGs start out very simplistic and then give you more options as the game goes on, which makes sense. You want to give people tools and space to mess around with before giving them more tools, because the more things you introduce, the more complex options there are. So ideally, you want to start people out with something more simple, and then give them more options as they master the previous options. But the thing about FNAF World is I feel like the game actually starts out more complex, and then you kind of get funneled into one final playstyle, and it's really frustrating. Now, I've actually been working on my own fan-made FNAF RPG in the background, and while I don't want to kind of just turn this video into me rambling about all of my autism about that, I do want to bring up that, unfortunately, I wanted to start out making the game a better version of FNAF World, but as I messed around with things, I realized that I could actually learn a lot from FNAF World on what not to be doing. To go a bit more in depth, for about like the first half of FNAF World, I feel like you have a lot of options. You have a lot of different stat boosting moves, you have a lot of different debuffing moves, you have a lot of different like wacky moves like Mystery Box or Unscrew or stuff like that. And then you get introduced to the move gift boxes. And the problem is that gift boxes is too strong of a move. And what I mean by that is that the way gift boxes work in FNAF World is you get a little box next to your party member, and if that party member ever gets knocked out, they immediately get revived at full health, and then the gift box gets destroyed in the process. So it basically just acts like a set of extra lives for your party. But the problem is, that is too good of a move, so the game kind of has to compensate and make the enemies very strong in comparison. But the problem with this is that it basically negates any sort of armor, any sort of healing moves, or any sort of defense or defense debuff, buffing, anything. Because what ends up happening is the final few bosses of the game just end up one-shotting your party members, because the expectation is that you'll just use gift boxes to revive them. Now, that alone would kind of take a lot of the depth and complexity out of FNAF World, but that's just one move. If anything, you just need one party member with gift boxes on your primary and backup team, and that's good enough to just deal with the whole game. And then Update 2 rolled around. And the whole gimmick of Update 2 was that there was this spooky super boss, and you need to get the super OP characters to go defeat him. And then the problem with that is when you only make 8 characters viable, whatever those 8 characters have to be enough. But the problem is, even that becomes a problem, because we get another move introduced, called Slasher. And Slasher has a 1 in 10 chance of doing a fuck ton of damage to the enemy. And so, the final boss does that in response, and I will compensate in response. And I will give FNAF World some grace here, because I feel like the bubble breath gimmick is a little interesting. It forces you to just make a decision, because lots of the characters that have bubble breath, and by the characters I mean specifically Nightmarion and Nightmare Balloon Boy, you have to either give up doing some highly damaging options or use a support move to keep your characters alive longer, or you could just choose to not use bubble breath and then try to use gift boxes to revive them once you die from the poison air. And again, that's what I like in RPGs, is when you have to choose, you have to have a choice between different seemingly correct options. Or what I mean is that there's multiple viable options and you need to make what choice you think is the best. But coming back to Slasher for a moment, since such a powerful option is available at all, the game needs to step up to balance it out. So what ends up happening is the final boss of FNAF World ends up it's basically just an RNG check, because the final boss has a 2-minute timer, and if you can't defeat the final boss in those 2 minutes, you get an instant game over. And since you're gonna have to be doing a bunch of other stuff to not instantly die as well, the only way you're actually able to defeat the boss is by spamming Slasher. And like I said, Slasher only has a 1 in 10 chance of landing. So, you could end up losing out of no fault of your own. You could be picking the correct options, and if you just don't get lucky enough, sorry, you lose, bye-bye, there goes your Nuzlocke or whatever. And I guess I just think it's really disappointing that the game not only funnels you into having less options, but at the end, you don't even have a choice, because it's RNG. It just comes down to, did you roll the slot machine and win the 777s? Because at least if you're relying on RNG in other parts of the game, it's more of a gimmick. If you're trying to use Unscrew on bosses, you have to willingly go into that knowing that you're kind of just messing around and not playing optimally. But with the rainbow, playing optimally is gambling. That's not good game design. Or rather, those odds in terms of gambling aren't good design, because lots of RPGs come down to gambling. Do you hit a critical hit? Do you proc bleed or poison or whatever? That comes down to random number generation. But when your only option is rolling a 1 in 10 chance 7 times, or you have to land 7 1 in 10 chances throughout a fight in a 2-minute span of time, I feel like that's not good design. Like, am I alone on this? I feel like I'm crazy because I see no one complaining about this, but I feel like that's not good game design. Now, after all I've said so far, I wouldn't blame you for thinking, well, that's FNAF World 1, this is FNAF World 2, and a good sequel should aim to do more of what works while also trying to evolve what was there before. And I think that's a very good optimistic way of looking at things. However, I feel like there's some good evidence, or at least some good precedent in this fandom, that might not always be the case. If you're part of the FNAF fandom, and maybe even if you aren't, you might have heard of FNAF World Refreshed. FNAF World Refreshed is a fan remake remaster of Five Nights at Freddy's World, and it aims to just add more to the game, rebalance what's already there, and just overall refresh the game, as the title says. And I've seen a lot of people claim that it's FNAF World 2, or FNAF World Update 3, or that it's good enough to be something that should be part of the main game. And I agree. I think it is a evolution of what we have in FNAF World Update 2. And there lies the problem. On a presentation level, in terms of like animations, visuals, humor, I think the game improves a lot on FNAF World. But the gameplay, which I have just been describing as FNAF World's weakest point, I feel like it becomes even more mind-numbing. Because the problem is, you end up having these characters who have these weird, wacky moves, and then they kind of just become all-encompassing to the point where you... okay, there's this YouTuber I really like called BY TheDapperWaffle, and he's been doing FNAF World challenges for a bit. And I'd like to point out that I feel like the only way you can make FNAF World difficult is by doing self-restriction challenges. And before anyone says like, oh, well, you were saying FNAF World isn't difficult. If you have to challenge yourself to make the game difficult, then the game isn't difficult. But anyways, he also started doing some challenges for FNAF World Refreshed. And something that is a constant in all of those videos is that the game is super easy. Even when you're trying to challenge yourself, there's very easy ways to break the game in your favor. And what I mean by that is that the game can almost play itself. And by almost, I mean like maybe you could set up like a script that just presses the WASD keys, and it would eventually probably find its way around the map, all while the battles basically fight themselves. Now, I don't say this to shame or even really criticize FNAF World Refreshed, because as I said, if anything, it's doing its job well. It's taking what's there in the base FNAF world and elaborating on it and just kind of freshening it up. It's not trying to rework the battle system. And if it was, I'd probably be a bit more critical on, well, the game still kind of doesn't play very well. But the game isn't aiming to do that. It's aiming to add a bunch of new fun characters, a few new areas, show off some cool animations, and I think it's doing a really good job of that, and I commend the developers for what they've done with FNAF World Refreshed. I guess my point here is, on top of the fact that not all game sequels are inherently good sequels, just giving us more of the same in terms of FNAF World won't automatically make things better, or it won't automatically fix the problems inherent to the battle system. So I guess I just hope that when FNAF World 2 does come out, that they actually attempt to rework the battle system, because as it stands now, even to the best ability of some of the fans, the system just has some inherent problems with it that are really hard to get around while still keeping things feeling like FNAF World. Because if you change too much, it might not feel like FNAF World, but keeping it the same obviously won't work either, because if you just keep making the game too easy or uninteresting or blinding to the eyes, that does not a good game make. Now, like I said, I really do enjoy FNAF World, and it's a comfort game of mine, and on top of all of that, I do want to have faith that there will still be good games coming out in the series, because I really do deeply care about FNAF and its future. I guess most of my criticisms are out of a sense of care and wanting things to be better, rather than me hating it or something. I hope that's not what I'm coming across like. And I guess maybe I'm seeming negative because, like I said, we barely even have confirmation that the game exists as FNAF World 2, so I feel like making too many assumptions about plot or whatever isn't going to be very effective at this stage, because like I said, we only really have one announcement image that implies FNAF World 2. We don't have a trailer, we don't have a release date, we don't have a Steam description or anything. All we have is a teaser image. And, if anything, I'm glad we have that because we get to talk about FNAF World. We get to discuss these things. I just hope that Scott and Megacat Studios don't look at the older criticisms of FNAF World and think, oh, we need to change the art style, we need to do all this stuff. And it doesn't seem like they're doing that because the teaser still has that kind of cutesy vibe. And I hope they look at the gameplay and try to improve that, because something I have a concern with is FNAF Security Breach and then FNAF Secret of the Mimic, because I feel like lots of people's big issue with Security Breach was the story, and the story was really bad, and I think Scott understood that because it was really his fault because he didn't communicate well enough with Steelwall. So, when Secret of the Mimic came out, they made sure to have a really strong story, and I think Secret of the Mimic has the best story, or at least standalone story, in the franchise. But I worry in the process of that, they didn't really consider the gameplay, because in terms of gameplay, even if I really love the story, Secret of the Mimic is super generic, I'm sorry. And it kind of upsets me a bit, because I've seen people be like, oh, we should have a stalker enemy in FNAF, and then I see people be like, oh, well, we had Secret of the Mimic, and I'm like, honey, that's not a stalker enemy. The Mimic is just a reskinned chaser enemy who runs in the same, when I think of a stalker enemy, I think of Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. The Mimic in Secret of the Mimic is technically different characters that are in Universe the Mimic, but they're just different chasers that follow a set path, chase you when you get too close, and then go back to patrolling. They're not, like, hunting you down. It's just that technically it's the same character hunting you down. But I mean, like, it's not a stalker enemy, at least in the way I think of a stalker enemy. At least, like, Resident Evil's way of looking at a stalker enemy. The greater gaming landscape way of looking at a stalker enemy. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I feel like Poppy Playtime has more engaging gameplay than Secret of the Mimic. And I feel like FNAF is like the king of mascot horror, and I want to see it retake that throne of not only story, like they did with Secret of the Mimic, but also, like, have fun, engaging gameplay. And I hope that also applies to the spin-offs, because Megacat Studios did a really good job making Into the Pit, but I feel like, looking at the development timeline from what we know, that was also back when Scott was a bit more hands-off, and how he talked about the game with his interview with Dawko made it seem like he kind of let them just do their own thing, and then he checked up on them occasionally to see what they had cooking. And I worry if Scott takes a more hands-on approach, that what will end up happening is the gameplay will be neglected again, in an attempt to sharpen up the story, when I feel like no one's coming to FNAF World for the story. They want a fun RPG with FNAF characters. And I guess that's what I'm worried about ultimately, is that, yes, FNAF World 1 has bad gameplay in my opinion, and that's what a sequel should aim to fix. But I worry that's not what Megacat Studios and Scott will focus on. I'm worried that they'll have their priorities elsewhere, and the gameplay will end up falling to the side again, and if that happens, I feel like we're just repeating the problems with FNAF World 1. So much of FNAF's identity is built around its mystery and story, and I understand that. And I'm glad with Secret of the Mimic that we've proven that we still can have good stories in this series. But back in 2014, before people knew there was a story to be found, what got people in the door? The gameplay. And looking back at like Markiplier's replay of FNAF 2 for his Redemption stream, I feel like I see that those, like, older games still hold up gameplay-wise, and I think that's super cool. And the thing is, if all FNAF has to offer is its story and mystery, people won't need to play the games, because people can just watch YouTube videos as a surrogate. But YouTube videos cannot be a surrogate for fun, engaging gameplay. If you have fun gameplay and a good story, people will play the game and to find the story, instead of just waiting for someone else to play the game to find the story for them. If you have a game worth playing, people will play it. I know that's a really dumb, obvious, brain-dead statement, but I guess I just feel like I worry sometimes that FNAF knows that its main draw is its mystery. But I think it sometimes forgets that to keep that mystery alive, you need to have gameplay worth playing to find the puzzle pieces. I hope that makes any sense, and I'm sorry for rambling so much. Like I said, this video was kind of just made because I had thoughts about FNAF World 2, and they've kind of just been building up in my head, and I kind of just wanted to talk about them. So I'm sorry if this video is a little unorganized, and due to my current mental state, I'm sorry if the video's editing is a bit shaky, but I just had these thoughts in my head, and I wanted to share them. And will this video do very well? Probably not. But at least I can sleep tonight, and by tonight I mean like 20 minutes after I finish uploading the video, and then rewatching it again. Or I'm getting off topic, but at least I can sleep well knowing that I have these thoughts finally out of my head. Anyways, I really do hope FNAF World 2 is good, and I'm excited to learn more about it whenever it comes out, because honestly, something else I haven't seen people talking too much about is that just because we have an announcement doesn't mean the game's actually coming out soon. Because we had security breach teasers a long time before that game came out. Anyways, thank you for listening to my mad rambling. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my thoughts, especially if you clicked on this video, because I'm going to do A/B testing. So if this video has an inflammatory title and you clicked on it anyways, thank you. And thank you for hearing me out, and thank you for listening to my silly opinions. What are your thoughts on FNAF World 2 of, like, what we know so far? What are your opinions on gameplay? What ways do you think they should improve the gameplay? Or do you think the gameplay is fine as it is and I'm just a whiny bastard? I'd like to hear your thoughts all down below. And, I guess the last thing I want to say is that really all they need to do to improve the game is just replace Virtua Freddy with the Mimic in the Mimic Ball attack, and the game will be a 10 out of 10, it will make $10 fazillion.